And welcome back to another daily devotion. I'm Pastor Roy here at Woodlawn Christian Church in Lake City, Iowa, and this devotion is for March 15th of 2023. We are in the book of First Corinthians. We're in the 7th chapter. Today we're going to look at verses 17 to 24. And I do apologize. I've got a bit of a headache tonight. The weather is being a little bit wonky, and it's 8:30 at night on a Tuesday night that I'm recording this. So with that, let's jump into verses 17 to 24. We've been talking about marriage and a lot about sex and things like that. We're going to take a bit of a break from marriage, talk about it again tomorrow. But today, this is not what he's looking at. He's talking about something a little different, kind of a little. Paul is like this. He kind of jumps around a little bit. I can relate to him. I can understand him. All right, let's look at verses 17 to 24. Only let everyone lead the life which the Lord has assigned to him, and in which God has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. Was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision. For neither circumcision counts for anything nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. Everyone should remain in the state in which he was called. Were you a slave when called? Never mind. But if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. For he who has called in the Lord as a slave is a freedman of the Lord. Likewise, he who is free when called is a slave of Christ. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. So, brethren, in whatever state each was called, there let him remain with God. Okay. These are kind of a difficult verses in some ways. First of all, this whole thing with circumcision is like, what do you mean? If you were circumcised, do not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. That's a little peculiar. I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can even do that today. And if you can, it probably isn't worthwhile, to be blunt. But you certainly couldn't have done it back in Paul's time. Now, one of the big things, Paul's revisiting circumcision. He talks about it a lot. We've talked about it in other devotions. This is part of Paul's whole thing of recruitment. I always call it Paul is selling Jewish light, because remember, at this time this is a Jewish sect. Christianity is not Christianity as we know it yet. It's a sect within Judaism, and I always say Paul is selling Jewish light, and the synagogues don't like that much because he's sniping off the God-fearers, because they are people that have wanted to become Jewish, but this whole idea of being circumcised, especially if you're an adult Gentile male who was not circumcised as an adult, that's risky, painful, for one thing, very painful. Second of all, you're taking a risk of infection, so that's dangerous in that day and age. No antibiotics. So there's a lot of downside to that, to be blunt. And so the idea that you could become this Jewish light that Paul is selling without that becomes quite attractive to folks. So that's an aside there. But his point here, I think, really is that we all have different roles to play. Some of us are called to great things. Some of us are called to not so great things. To do we're all parts of the body of Christ. He's used that metaphor before too. You've got the hands and the feet, the eyes and the mouth, and what have you. And one is not greater than the other. The thing that we have to remember is that even if we're just doing a small role, you look at some of the folks that only perhaps they help us with vacation Bible school or something like that, but they make a comment to someone and it makes a big impact in that person's life, and maybe that person goes on to really have a very vital role in the church, or maybe that person goes on to spread the love of Christ to somebody else, and then that person goes on to have a really major role. We don't know. It's up to us to just we need to be oftentimes where we are planted. That's where we need to grow, and that's where we need to water, and that's where we need to help out, wherever God decided to plant us. And don't think that we have to be this grandiose thing. We can be a small town pastor, if we want of a better analogy. And we don't know the people we impact. That's the important part that we need to always remember. So we always need to keep impacting people and trying to be a good influence for folks, because you never know when you're witnessing. I tell the story often, and I don't think I've told it for a little while. One of the first years I was helping out with the youth group over here, at Christmas time, a young fellow came in. It wasn't one of the kids in my class. Wasn't a boy that I had in my class. His mother came in with him. I didn't know the little guy. Didn't remember seeing him at youth group. But his mother came and said, he wanted to come over and give you this box of cherries. He brought me a box of Cordell cherries, which was great. I love cherries. So chocolate covered cherries. And he brought those to me and said his mom said he wanted to give these to you because, for the impact that you've had on him, all the things you've done for him. I don't know what in the world I did for him. And he was such a quiet little guy. So he came up and gave them to me and smiled and turned around, ran back to his mom, and they left. And I don't know. I don't know. I feel terrible. I will always feel terrible. But at the same time, that's driving home the point. I don't need to know. It's not up to my ego to know that I made a difference to that little guy. God gave me a little bit of a chance to see that I did. But I don't. Most of the impacts that you have in this world with people, or children especially, you're not going to know it. You just aren't going to know it. You won't know it. They may go on and say, "I remember Mrs. Such and Such. She was always such a sweet lady." You don't, and you don't remember the little child's name, but they remember you. And they may not even remember your name, but they remember what you did for them, or what you represented. That you represented to them Christ, and that's the important part. God will use you where you are planted. Don't feel like you need to be this grandiose thing. And it's not important for you to change. You need to change to be less of a sinner, but you don't need to be this high polished, fancy, falutin, what have you, refined thing. You can be just a simple believer, a simple follower of Christ. Just simply love him. That's all it takes. All right? That's what I've got for you tonight. Have a blessed one, and please, please, please be a blessing to someone today. All right? Tomorrow we're going to go back talking about married and unmarried. All right? God bless you. See you then. Bye-bye.